Today, we're diving into a fundamental choice, one that can literally make or break a country. It's all about power and what happens when a nation is divided against itself. Today, we're diving into a fundamental choice, one that can literally make or break a country. It's all about power and what happens when a nation is divided against itself. So, we're going to put that idea under the microscope. Does sharing power between different groups actually set a country up for failure? Or could the exact opposite be true? And look, this isn't just some abstract academic question. For tons of countries around the world, this is a very real, very high stakes problem. What do you do when your country is a patchwork of different cultures, languages, and identities? To figure this out, we're going to look at two countries that stare this exact problem in the face: Belgium, over in Europe, and the island nation of Sri Lanka in South Asia. Both democracies, both with diverse populations, but as we'll see, they chose radically different answers. Okay, so let's get our bearings. On the left, you've got Belgium, split between the Dutch-speaking north and the French-speaking south. On the right is Sri Lanka, where you can see the Tamil population is heavily concentrated in the northern and eastern parts of the island. Two maps setting the stage for two completely different outcomes. Alright, so in Belgium, here's where it gets tricky. The Dutch speakers, they're the majority in the country as a whole, but the French-speaking minority was, for a long time, richer and more powerful. And get this, in the capital city, Brussels, the French speakers were actually the majority. So you can see how that's a really tough situation to navigate. Now let's jump over to Sri Lanka. The situation was different, but the tension was just as high. The numbers here are much more stark. You've got the Sinhala speakers making up a huge 74% majority, with the Tamil speakers at 18%. This setup created a scenario where, the majority could pretty easily just impose its will on everybody else. So this is the key. Both of these nations found themselves at a massive fork in the road. One path was dominance. Just let the majority rule, period. The other path was accommodation. Try to figure out a way for everyone to share power. And the choice they made, well, it would change everything. So first, let's walk down that path of dominance. After Sri Lanka got its independence back in 1948, the leaders of the Sinhala majority decided to lock down their power. And their story? Well, it's a huge warning sign for the rest of the world. The idea that drove their decisions has a name: majoritarianism. It's pretty much what it sounds like. The belief that the majority gets to rule however it sees fit. And if the minority doesn't like it, too bad. This idea would become the bedrock of Sri Lankan politics for years. And here's how they put that idea into action. In 1956, they passed a law making Sinhala the only official language, basically ignoring Tamil. Then the government started giving preference to Sinhala speakers for good university spots and government jobs. And finally, the new constitution itself promised to protect and promote Buddhism, the majority religion. You can probably guess what happened next, right? The Sri Lankan Tamils felt completely pushed aside. They saw their language, their culture, their chances at a good life all being stripped away by a government that was supposed to be for everyone. This deep, growing anger and distrust, it didn't just stay in the world of politics. It got worse. The Tamils asked for more control over their own regions, and the government said no, again and again. The tension just spiraled until it exploded into a full-blown civil war. And the end of this story is just devastating. Thousands upon thousands of people from both communities were killed. So many more lost everything or had to flee the country. The war finally ended in 2009, but it left a terrible scar on the social and economic life of Sri Lanka. The price of not sharing power was unbelievably high. But remember that fork in the road? Let's go back and explore the other path. Let's switch gears and go back to Belgium, which took a totally different route. They chose accommodation. And you have to understand, this was not easy. It wasn't some quick fix. The leaders in Belgium knew they had a serious problem. So over 23 years, they actually changed their constitution 4 different times, carefully building a system where everyone could live together. And the model they came up with is seriously clever. Okay, So first, in the main central government, there has to be an equal number of Dutch and French-speaking ministers. No one group can just steamroll the other. Second, they gave a ton of power to the regional state governments, and those governments aren't just puppets of the central one. Third, Brussels, the capital city, got its own separate government with equal representation. And finally, they created this whole other level of government, called a community government, just to handle things like culture and language for each group. And you can literally see this idea in action on the streets. Look at this street sign from Brussels. The name is right there in both French and Dutch. It's a small thing, but it's a constant visible reminder that both communities matter. So the big question, did this super complicated kind of weird model actually work? Oh yeah, and not only saved Belgium from a civil war or breaking apart, it worked so well that when the countries of Europe decided to unite into the European Union, they chose Brussels to be their headquarters. It became a symbol of unity, built on this foundation of sharing power. So after seeing these two totally different stories, what's the big lesson here? Why is sharing power, which seems so messy and complicated, so often the smarter play? Well, it boils down to two types of reasons. The first kind of reasons are what we call prudential. Think of these as the practical, smart, strategic reasons. Sharing power is just smart because it lowers the chance of conflict, which means more political stability. And in the long run, it can actually make the country stronger, more unified. Then you have the moral reasons. And this argument is much simpler. Sharing power is the very soul of democracy. It's just the right thing to do. It recognizes that citizens have a right to have a say in how they're governed. Okay, so this brings us to one last really tough question. Because, it's one thing to look back at history, but what do you do in the messy reality of today? To think about that, let's look at a real-world puzzle from Lebanon. See, after its own terrible civil war, the leaders in Lebanon came up with a very strict power-sharing deal. It's written into their laws. The president has to be a Christian, and the prime minister has to be a Muslim. It's a complex system, but it did stop the war and has kept a fragile peace. But now, there's a popular young guy named Khalil, and he's challenging the whole system. He doesn't want to be stuck in the conflicts of his parents' generation. And he's asking a pretty compelling question. Why can't we just be a normal democracy? Let's just hold an election and whoever gets the most votes wins. Simple. And that is the question we're going to leave with you. Now that you've seen the stories of Sri Lanka and Belgium, what would you do? Would you stick with Lebanon's old rules, that complicated deal that, for all its flaws, has kept the peace, or would you roll the dice and go for that normal democratic path that Khalil wants? There really is no easy answer.